Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dave Russell. I'm here with my colleagues, Tony Dalimonte and Charlie Sarchet. We are all attorneys at Foster Swift, part of the Foster Swift Sports Group. We're putting on this webinar because the world of college sports has changed more probably in the last 3 years than it has in the last 3 decades. We hear from parents almost every day that they feel overwhelmed and they want to help their kids chase their dreams, but they don't know what's real, what's a trap, and what these new NIL and revenue sharing rules affect and how they affect recruiting. Tonight, we're going to try to walk through and talk about the big picture and simplify it a little bit. Talk about the new rules, what you need to know, what revenue sharing and NIL really mean, how to think about building and protecting your child's brand, and what to watch for when NIL deals come across the table. Along the way, we'll also talk about practical things like negotiating contracts and dealing with taxes. The goal is really to give you the tools to make you confident and informed decisions as you and your child are going through this recruiting process. Before we dive into the substance a little bit, we each want to just introduce ourselves. Like I said, my name is Dave Russell. I'm also a commercial litigator in our Lansing office. I'm also a dad that's been through the process with two daughters. My oldest daughter, Reagan, graduated high school in 2018. Played 4 years of Division I lacrosse at Kent State University. My younger daughter, Abby, just committed to Pitt. She'll be there in 2026 after she finishes her senior year this year. So just kind of went through the process and all the official visits, along with helping out some athletes and seeing it from the legal side. So hopefully I'll add a unique perspective, and so will Tony and Charlie.
Hey everyone, I'm Tony Delamonte. I'm an attorney in our Southfield office. I do primarily employment law and litigation, but sports has always been a big part of my life. I was a walk-on at Michigan. I played football, and I had 2 years under Brady Hoke and 2 years of Harbaugh. And I'm actually a member of the class action that we'll talk about and how we got here. But yeah, so been both a player and now an advocate in the space. And we, like Dave said, we get questions all the time on what are the rules. Things are changing every day, it seems like. So we just kind of wanted to put this together and see if we can help some folks out.
Hey everyone, my name's Charlie Sarchet. I'm an attorney in our Grand Rapids office. But unlike these guys, I focus primarily on business and corporate law, transactional stuff. And I'm getting more involved in sports law now as well, as I represent current MSU football players, helping them with their NIL contracts, sorting through compliance issues, and just helping with the financial side of things. Unlike Dave and Tony, I'm not a parent of an athlete or a walk-on football player at a D1 school, but I got pretty heavily involved in sports law in college, and then in law school as well. I was the president of the Sports Law Society at Michigan State University when I was there for law school. And then, like Tony said, me, Dave, and Tony kind of established this sports law group shortly after I joined the firm, and it's really been taking off ever since.
Plug the podcast too, Charlie.
Yeah, we started a podcast too. We didn't know that we'd be podcasters, but here we are. It's called Foster Swift Sports Talk. We try to record at least a couple times a month. I feel like we're doing it more and more. But we've had a lot of good guests on lately. We started with Jake Boss, the head baseball coach at Michigan State. We had the Michigan High School Athletics Association director, Mark Ewell, on. And then we recently had a couple of our clients. We've had a couple of our clients on, and we've had Cole Moore, Michigan State's general manager, as well. So that's going really well. And if you ever know of anybody that you think would be a good guest, feel free to reach out to us.
I think we've gotten a lot better since week one. Do you guys agree?
We've cleaned it
So
up.
yeah, and honestly, I think our guests have really added a great perspective from coaches to players who've gone through it. We had the Amakri siblings on, and hearing their perspective. Came up playing soccer at Toledo. Nakai's right now at Bowling Green, about to have a huge year, and Corey just recently committing to Kansas. That's an example of a great episode and some great perspective. And we've had a lot of those, and then. So looking forward to continuing that. Tomorrow we have Jeff Corian from the D Zone on. I think that'll be a great episode.
Sure.
Yeah, and we also had Ashley Holcomb and Brooklyn Samuel, who work on the back end on sports. So, front office, to sort of give a different perspective as well. So we're trying to round out the whole sort of sports ecosystem. Perfect.
Oh, do you
All right.
want to
Well,
dive
I
into the
guess.
House settlement?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think we should start with the biggest headline in college sports, at least a couple months ago, to sort of educate us on where we got where we are today. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it on the news or on social media, but it was the House versus the NCAA settlement. It was a $2.8 billion settlement, and it's described as the lawsuit that sort of finally ended the NCAA's amateurism model and opened the door for schools to directly pay athletes. So, what does that really mean for families and for kids going through the recruiting process right now? We kind of want to walk through a little bit of background on how we've gotten here, and then we'll give you some of the tools that you need to know about. So, real quick on the lawsuit. So this case started back in 2020. Two former athletes, Grant House and Sedona Price, sued the NCAA. Their argument was basically that the NCAA's rules blocked athletes from profiting off of their name, image, and likeness and sharing in broadcast revenue. Fast forward to May of 2024, so just a couple months ago, the NCAA and conferences agreed to settle, and then in June, of 20, or I'm sorry, May 2024, and then June of 2025, so 2 months ago, the judge gave final approval on the settlement, and that decision is going to change college athletics forever. And so the portions of that settlement are big back pay portion, $2.8 billion. I don't think that's going to affect anyone listening here, but if you have any questions, let us know. But the other portion is that starting now, schools can directly compensate athletes, capped at about $20.5 million per year, with that number to grow annually. And the other big thing that I'll talk about, and Charlie's going to talk about as well, is scholarship limits are no more. We now have roster limits. And the other thing is we've got a new oversight body. So now forever we had the NCAA. They were the ones who issued violations and monitored college sports. Now we have an entity called the College Sports Commission. And going forward, the College Sports Commission is going to be the body that is monitoring and enforcing any rules related to revenue sharing, roster limits, and NIL. So let me pause there. Anything you guys want to jump in with before I talk a little bit about roster limits, rev sharing?
So the NCAA is not going anywhere, right, Tony? The NCAA is still going to be there for eligibility. There's still going to be a thorn in our side for sure. And now they've introduced the College Sports Commission, which is going to add to that. And like you said, roster limits, rev share compliance, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. So the NCAA is going to handle essentially everything that they did before. Certain bylaws were taken out of their rules. But anything related to revenue sharing, roster limits, NIL, that is all going to be the College Sports Commission. So speaking of
Tony, one thing I
roster,
might jump in on is
yeah.
I know this whole NIL go made the news for right after it was approved by Judge Wilkin because of the fact that they originally stated that collectives couldn't meet the standard to get approved for these NIL deals. There's since been a resolution when the plaintiffs' class attorneys push back on that, and so collectives can now. Enter into these deals. And I think you're going to talk about what that standard is, but I just want to make sure that we mention that.
Yeah, exactly. So traditional NIL is still there. We're probably still going to have collectives in the future. The big difference now is that we've got revenue sharing, which means that schools can now pay players directly. And Charlie's going to get in the weeds, but from a big picture perspective, this really means that the schools are signing these deals with the players to sort of take a first bite at the apple for their NIL rights. And so these agreements, which the three of us have seen, essentially saying that, hey, the players are going to give a license to use their image, their name, their likeness, and then in return, the schools are going to pay the players a certain amount. Um, and so that is different than traditional NIL, which is like, you've got a quarterback on a Big Ten team going and signing a deal with a car dealership or a law firm. That would be completely separate. Um, so on revenue sharing, um, the schools all have a cap. So you had to opt into the revenue sharing. Schools all now have a cap. Whenever they sign a deal with a player, any monies paid to players go against that cap. Traditional NIL, so again, the dealership, the law firm advertising deal, those don't count towards each school's cap. Um, so let me pause there on revenue sharing, and I want to talk about roster limits for a second. So again, scholarship limits are gone. We now have roster limits, and schools can decide how many scholarships and financial aid are provided to each sport. So, for example, forever Michigan had, or I'm sorry, football had a 85 scholarship limit. That's now gone, and the roster limit for football is 105. And then it's going to be up to the school on whether or not they allocate all scholarships to that 105. But there's now a system where each sport is going to have to submit their roster for approval to this new system called CAPS, to track and to manage. And basically, at the start of every season, they are going to have to be under that roster limit before the season starts. There is
Tony,
also
I got to
a yeah,
jump. I don't want to cut you off, Tony, but just so we're not only talking about football, I don't know if we have folks here on the non-revenue side, but how that affects them. Not it may affect non-revenue even more in some ways. Take lacrosse for instance. Prior to the House settlement, the roster caps would have been, they would have teams of over 40 where they only were allowed to have 12 scholarships. Now their roster cap is at 38 and they can have 38 full scholarships, which would seem like a good thing. You're not going to see many schools, maybe one or two, that will actually have that many scholarships, but that was supposed to be a benefit for the non-revenue sports. And a part that plays into that, and we probably won't go too far in the weeds, is Title IX and what that looks like, because what Title IX does is it requires that the benefits to male and female athletes are the same, as at least as it relates to the number of scholarships out there. So the impact of that could actually be that non-revenue men's sports you may see some of those getting cut because of the way that the roster limits and the scholarships end up shaking out with the whole thing. So sorry to cut you off, Tony, but I wanted to add that.
And
no, no, that's a great
we had
point.
an attorney that actually argued in the House settlement um, on the podcast who was raised some Title IX issues. So we had her on the podcast. That's a really good episode if anybody has questions on that. Another thing I want to say just real quick, if anybody has questions during this webinar, you can put them in the chat. I've got it pulled up, but we can answer questions as we go, or you can save them for the end, whatever you're feeling.
Yeah,
Tony, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I think one thing, and maybe I'll leave it to you to talk about the designated athletes, but along with the collectives, towards the end of this big settlement, one of the things that held up the settlement was, as schools were preparing for the roster limits, they were preemptively sort of telling current players like, "Hey, we got to cut down our roster. We don't think you're gonna make the team." Basically, cutting them. So a lot of people reached out to the attorneys as part of the House settlement, and um, one of the sort of solutions to that is there's something called a designated athlete. And it's basically individuals who are on rosters as of April 2025 who are promised the spot. Schools can now designate certain athletes and it won't count against the roster limit. So just wanted to mention that there. Um,
If anything did happen to them, I think they can go to plaintiff's counsel in the case and they can raise those issues. This is actually, I think, a good time. Amanda asked a pretty good question that's kind of going along with what we're talking about. She said, as a parent of a senior talking to multiple D1 women's rowing teams, how does the settlement impact her recruiting process? So I mean, I can kind of start, but Dave, you might have some good insight here too. But I don't know what the caps would be for rowing. The settlement might impact her. It depends on the school. So I don't know if Tony talked about this already yet, but some schools may allocate some of this rev share money to multiple sports, or they may be focusing only on football and basketball. It really depends on the school. So a rowing team could see some rev share money coming in. But besides that, there may be some NIL opportunity as well, depending on the school if they have a good rowing program.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. I don't think I mentioned that, Charlie. So what happens now is you've got this $20.5 million to play with that all of these schools have, assuming that they opted into the settlement. Um, and the schools decide where to allocate that money. What we're seeing is, most of the time, the majority of that money is going to be towards football and men's basketball as the sort of revenue generating sports. But that's not always the case. You have, for example, schools like UConn that don't have a football team and, a really successful basketball team. You could have other sports or other schools with really successful other sports. So as you go
They get
through the
rid of their
recruiting
football team, Tony?
process, what'd you say?
Did UConn get rid of their football team?
I didn't know they had one to begin with. Are they
I
Division
thought they
One?
did at some point.
Um, but yeah, so the schools decide how to allocate the money, and then once the money is in the hands of whatever sport, then typically the sports will make the decisions on the players. We had Cole Moore on who said, yeah, he had a certain amount of money to play with to make sure that he got transfers and recruits in and the current players. So as you go through the recruiting process, I would find out what the rev share is, if any is allocated to your particular sport. That would be something you want to know off the bat.
Right. I think that's one of your first questions when you're talking to a school, whether it's Amanda's talking to a school about rowing, or you're a football recruit talking to a general manager, is to ask them if they're getting a share of the revenue and what that looks like. If it's football, you're probably looking about $15 million. If it's basketball, you might be in the $4 to $5 million range, depending on whether the school has a football team or not. It could be higher. And some schools decide to prioritize more, like University of Kentucky has prioritized more revenue share money towards basketball than what you've seen in the traditional Power Five. But the breakdowns are on average about the same. But that's a question you want to ask.
While we're kind of on the topic of roster limits, Jeff asked if the new roster cap gets rid of walk-ons. I don't believe it does, but it might significantly reduce opportunities. What we're seeing and what we heard from Cole Moore when he was on our podcast was that schools are going to be really looking for athletes, like football players, especially that have experience at a smaller school, maybe in the MAC conference or D2, D3 school, that they have college film that they can look at and then take on transfers rather than even taking less high school recruits even. So walk-on opportunities, I don't think they're going away, but they're going to be pretty few and far between, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean for big Power Five football teams, I think before the roster limits, teams were holding 30, 135, 140 guys on their roster when you only have 85 scholarships. So, you do the math, that's 40 plus walk-ons. Not everyone's going to have 130, but I think when I was at Michigan, we wavered anywhere from 115 to 130 with 20 plus walk-ons at any given time, which I don't think you're going to have anymore. With the roster limits, at least in football, I would anticipate general managers and recruiters to be a little bit more selective. But I think it's going to be an unfortunate consequence of the new world that we live in. But we'll see.
Yeah. Before we move too far on, I could talk about just some state-specific rules. So a lot of states have different NIL rules for high school athletes and college, as far as college or statewide legislation goes. But for high school, taking Michigan as an example, athletes can profit from NIL right now without losing eligibility. Based on our conversation with Mark Ewell, it sounds like these opportunities are going to be pretty rare, not going to apply to too many high school athletes. But like right now, Michigan's not allowing it to happen extensively. They do allow some camps and lessons to be taught by high school athletes in which they can get paid. We recommend going to your high school's athletic director to talk about any specific questions. Um, and the issue that we're looking at there too is if high school athletes did accept NIL before they're graduating, then they're kind of risking some of their high school eligibility as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. Dave, can you talk a little bit about how revenue sharing negotiations are going on with high school athletes? Like, there's no letter of intent anymore, no national signing day that's going to bind them to a school, right?
Right, that's one of the changes from the House settlement that we see now is there's no national letter of intent. There's a national signing day, and what actually happens is the school gets bound by, I believe they call it a benefits agreement now. So the school is bound, but the athlete's not bound. And Cole Moore, the general manager for Michigan State, talked about this when he came on. You know, they're basically paranoid till the time that the student athlete steps on campus, because until that time they really can go elsewhere. There's nothing that's binding them. What they're signing, and I don't know if we're going to get into this later or not, but is a revenue share agreement. And that's one of those things that I know we're going to talk about this a little bit, but I'm probably getting ahead of myself. But you want to negotiate that, and that's negotiating also, what that revenue share portion is. But that's going to be binding on the student athlete.
Right. And that's kind of where jobs that Cole Moore has now as a general manager came in to kind of look at that revenue share cap that they have and allocate it among the players that they're going to have. And that's a tough job. We don't envy it because they gotta promise certain amounts to some players and then maybe not pay guys as much as they're really valued in other circumstances. So that's kind of a tough spot.
Yeah, and if I could jump in here real quick, I think, and Dave, you've seen it on the parent side, but you're going to see now in recruiting and pretty early on in the high school process, schools using revenue sharing as a pitch. You're going to see, coaches talking about it. And I think, what we've seen is you're going to see agents and lawyers more involved in the process early on. So, official visits, speaking with general managers throughout the recruiting process, which, frankly, I don't think you saw, or it wasn't, allowed 5 years ago. So the landscape has really changed. So again, asking questions, understanding some of these rules, they're really important.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about, now that we have NIL, you kind of have to protect your brand, right? Like what is a brand that a student athlete's they're trying to sell, their NIL, they're trying to be a salesman for themselves. What is this brand that students are trying to build?
Well, I mean, I think brand is, it's more than just NIL deals. It's the reputation, the character, consistency. Every athlete that they have some type of brand, whether it's a good brand or it's a bad brand, whether they realize it or not. And these schools that are now in this revenue sharing phase where people like Cole Moore or Rob Ianello from Kansas or whatever general manager is, I use the analogy to Moneyball. I mean, they're making a determination on kids, and it's when you're being recruited, you're not just competing against other high school athletes for those spots. You're competing the transfer portal, which quite frankly, what we're seeing right now is a more competitive market than the other kids that you're competing against in high school, because, we talked about this. These general managers feel like they can't miss. And I mean, this isn't just football. I think this is all sports. These are non-revenue sports as well. And so when they're looking at an athlete and they're looking at the brand, they're looking at the whole package. They're looking at their parents. They're looking at the student. They're looking at how the athlete not only performs on the field, but they're looking at body language, their hustle, their interactions with teammates, opponents, referees, how they talk to coaches, their body language. And it's not just at, high school games. It's in 7-on-7. It's AAU. It's club play. It's all of those different places. And those places all have, club directors. They have 7-on-7 directors. They have AAU coaches. All those people are very well connected. The easiest thing for the coaches to do, their first stop in a lot of sports, almost every sport, is to talk to these folks that run the clubs and run the camps to say, I, I I like Tony Dalimonte. He looks like a good football player. What's the kid's attitude? Things like that. Or, have you had any issues with how involved are his parents? What does that look like? So you have that on the field and the professionalism, and then you look at the social media, which um, that's your off the field, building of your brand. The social media posts that you're liking and commenting, and I mean, they're telling a story about the athlete, and that's part of building the brand of the athlete.
Right.
And so, you know, it's good and bad, right? You can build a brand on social media, and you can make some money that way. And when we talk to athletes, that's one of the things we talk about is, okay, how can you maybe maximize that? You take a high level college football athlete who's taken all these official visits. I mean, each time they go to one of these official visits, they get a lot of followers. The more followers they get, the more interaction. So, that's a good thing. But, when we had Coach Bossel, or, the club director from Next on, she's talking about, part of the tedious thing of being an athlete or a recruit is you're writing these emails and doing these other things to try to get attention. So she made the point of you've got parents, right? You can tell they're writing the email. So a 55-year-old dad writing emails for his 15-year-old lacrosse daughter to what is probably a 20-something-year-old coach, which is clear to them that it's not their daughter that's writing the emails. And then when they go and they look at the social media, it's got some kind of party persona as opposed to lacrosse persona. And I'm not saying, no one's saying that they need to be all sports specific. They certainly can show who they are, but when they're the only communication until a coach can reach out directly to an athlete is the email communication and the social media that they look at. That's their only way to make a determination on, okay, I'm looking at two different athletes. Who do I want to pursue and put my resources in? And so, I think that's a big thing that you take advantage of. You know, Coach Bossel also talks about, showing up at a tournament. I mean, from the minute you walk out of your car till the minute you get back in the car, someone's probably watching you. Are you throwing trash on the ground? How are you treating your friends as you're walking around? Are you talking to your parents with respect? How are they talking to you? How are they talking to other parents? Are they yelling at the referees? Are they going crazy on the sidelines? Are they yelling at the coach? All those different things, they play into what ultimately is this brand. And, when we think of brands, we think of, okay, they're making money on a brand, Cohen Carr, he has a brand obviously, but when you're looking at a brand right now as you're getting recruited, you should be looking at it as, or at least in my opinion, you should be looking at it as, what story am I telling to the school or the different schools that I want to be recruited by? Because it's such an important thing.
Right.
And in a lot of situations, it's the only way they can, make an evaluation other than your talent alone. But, at the end of the day, a lot of times there will be, 10 athletes who are basically even, one may be a little better here and this, missing one thing and the other one's missing another. But, a lot of times it's a guessing game. And so, coaches don't want to miss. So, those are all things that you needed to take into account.
And
Yeah,
we're not saying, sorry, Tony, we're not saying that you have to go out and start doing TikTok dances to build your following, right? I mean, but we are saying that is that you absolutely have to pay attention to where the way that you carry yourself, both on the field and off the field.
And that's exactly what I was going to say too, and just reiterate that point. Whether or not whether you're walking into, an official visit with Ohio State, or you're walking into a lacrosse tournament with your club team, where there'll be some schools there. People are watching you from the second you step out of your car. They're looking at your social media, and they're using the tools that they have at their hands to make those decisions. And like Dave said, when you've got 10 people that you're deciding between, you want that recruiter, that coach, or whoever it is to be like, yeah, I want Charlie. I met his parents. They're good people. He's hardworking. He sent me a Twitter DM or an email that seemed genuine. I don't see any red flags on his social media. Things like that, I think, are what go in their minds. And so that's kind of the thought process. And you just want to make sure that you're monitoring what you put out there.
Yeah. We had another good
For
question
the
that kind of
record, I'm
goes along
actually
with
really
this.
glad that none of the potential coaches for my daughter's lacrosse ever went to a high school game because I was a little crazy myself. So I mean,
There
I
you
get
go. Yeah. We had another good question that kind of goes along with this. We got if a player is generating more NIL money than the average player, does that increase the chances they'll see the field? So what I think where we draw the distinction here is between third party NIL and then the rev share money, right? So if you have a bigger following, say you're really popular on TikTok for some reason, you could get some really good third party NIL endorsement deals from that for sure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be getting more rev share money from the school that you're at, right? Rev share money is going to be a decision by, the general manager like Cole Moore based on your talent and your how your play is on the field. So you could be making a lot of rev share money and then not have a following at all on social media and just not be worried about third party NIL deals. But just because you're making more NIL money doesn't necessarily you'll see the field more. And in fact, in some of the NIL contracts that we've seen with schools, they put clauses in there that say they're under no obligation to play you. Like if you're going to get mad at your school for not playing you and you think you're going to say that's hurting your NIL value, school says I don't care. That's not our job. That's not what we're worried about. Their decision to play you doesn't affect, or they're basically saying their decision to play you or not is not going to affect your NIL value.
Yeah, and I think,
conversely, I think it's important though. I think if you're making more in revenue share money than what the other, whatever position, say a safety is on the team, I think it's a better chance you're going to see the field first than the other safety, and I, it all comes down to the schools putting the resources. Because remember, I know it's a hard distinction to understand necessarily, but the revenue share is coming from the school, so that's their, say, for a football program, $15 million. So if you have a safety that's making a lot more money than all the other safeties, likely going to see the field first. Now obviously they need to win to keep their job, so not going to see the field if they're getting beat on every pass route, but they're probably going to get more opportunities than everyone else. And I think that goes to the point of where do you want to be? Are you better off being at a Power Five making less, or are you better off if you can go to a mid-major, make more because of that same concept of you're likely to see the field. And while you may not be at your dream school in year one, what does that look like if you're on the field all year and there's no restriction on the transfer, so you could jump into the portal after year one, and now you're really competing against these high school recruits, and you've got NCAA Division One game film, which is really invaluable.
Mhm.
yeah, I was gonna make that point too, Dave. That like, forever before money was, officially involved, guys who are the top recruits, there's always politics behind the scenes with coaches. And, if you promise things to recruits, but I mean, now it's kind of like the professional model where if you pay a wide receiver $15 million a year, like, yeah, in the back of your mind, you probably want to try to put that guy on the field as much as possible over a guy that you're paying less. So I think those considerations will go into effect, especially if two guys are at an equal level. But if you're that guy who's not making as much, again, I think the coaches at the end of the day they do want to win, so hopefully they'll make the decision that best helps the team.
I see we
Because
had another question about what are the biggest social media red flags. I think we can all uh, talk about that a little bit. Obviously, drinking, illegal drugs are big things, kind of those what we call partying things. There was, and I'm sure you'll remember Charlie or Tony, but it was someone on there. It was actually their Venmo, I think, had and I think it was a joke, but they were putting on there that they're basically it was over under on a game or something like that. And this is a player in Division One, so that would obviously be a really bad red flag to have gambling type things on there. Um,
yeah,
but
I think
at the end of the day, I think what you want to have on there, unless you have some kind of dance thing where you're showing your personality in that way to maybe have followers to show your sports or if you're going to prom obviously stuff like that pictures like that but I just think there's some things that are when it comes to partying it's gonna look negative on for the coaches.
yeah, I think you just got to ask yourself the question like would this post or would what I said on this post would I be proud of that 4 or 5 years down the road? If not, use your common sense. If you don't think so, then I can pretty much assure you, coaches, general managers aren't going to like it either. We had another question: 12-month versus 18-month revenue sharing contracts with schools. Is one better than the other? Dave, I think you could hit that nail on the head.
I think it depends on the situation. The longer the deal, obviously, the more you're probably guaranteeing yourself money, depending on how the revenue share contract is drafted. But there's also a flip side of that. Can you get more in the 12-month? I mean, we talked about this with Cole Moore, whether there's going to be multi-year deals. Obviously, you've seen a few at University of Michigan's quarterback. I think that's what is that, a 4-year deal that he has, which I think is the only one in the country right now. But I think my position is, I mean, it's really goes to how much security you can get the student athlete. But at the end of the day, remember, like even if you're an 18-month or you're a 24-month or you're a 36-month, all these contracts are read to if the student athlete enters the transfer portal. So, let's say student athlete has a huge freshman year and then in February, whenever the transfer portal opens up, enters the portal. The way the revenue share contract is written, they're all written this way. The contract automatically terminates, so you don't have that ability to really go out and test your value. I mean, I'm not saying that the school you're at can't make a new deal, but that's what in effect has to happen because once you do that, the rev share contract terminates.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's
it's kind of weighing the guaranteed money that you want over a certain time frame versus, if the portal is something that you do want to test, or like Dave said, if someone has a massive season and coaches start calling, it could be a little bit of a, detractor if you've got an 18-month rev share. We're seeing that some of the all of these agreements are written so that there's some penalty if you do enter the transfer portal. Either you have to pay it back or some sort of provision like that. So those are considerations that you'd have to go through. If you've got someone, for example, who knows they want to stay in a place, you could get a little bit more money up front by agreeing to 18 months. Maybe that's what you want to do.
The security piece of it, right? If you can't, for whatever reason, get on the field that first year, if you're at 18 months instead of 12 months, presumably you're going to have a much larger contract, and that's secured money, and so that's a good thing. But a lot of that too, you have to look at how it's negotiated. These aren't all written the same way, so how the the revenue share is distributed, it's not like if you have say you have $100,000 deal that it's over 12 months, it's exactly the same. What you're going to see is probably your first draft is going to have a lot of it backloaded. And if they can, they're going to backload it right after the transfer portal. So if you do jump in, they're never going to pay you that amount. So that's kind of part of that negotiation that is important that you look at. And the other thing that's in there as well, in that revenue share agreement, that's important to look at is we talk about these other NIL deals. The way these revenue share agreements are all written are you are licensing or you are contracting all of your name, image, and likeness rights to the university. So they have those. Now, they'll have a provision most likely in there that states they can approve an NIL deal or let you go out and get that, but they're going to have to do that. So, and there's certain things that they're likely not going to let you do. Like if you have a shoe deal or you think you're going to get a shoe deal and you're playing for a Nike school, they're not going to want you to do that. And if you've signed that, then you're going to be bound by that.
Same thing with, so any conflicting endorsements or, kind of like what we were talking about with social media, it's probably not going to get approved if you try to go do advertising for, a CBD company or a marijuana company, anything related to drugs, alcohol, things that the team or the school might get some apprehension on from like a ethics or a morality standpoint, those things would probably be off limits as well.
Yeah, that's I were kind of answering Michael's question. He's just asking about notable things we've been seeing in these agreements. And we kind of already talked about most of them that we've seen, but the agreements, just by limiting, an athlete's ability to transfer, their ability to enter into third-party NIL agreements, and even limiting their access to a scholarship, right? They're like some schools try to be sneaky and take away a scholarship, but then they say that they're going to give you NIL money. So that's kind of what we do is read those agreements. We've seen some of those notable contract terms that schools have tried to sneak in. We kind of identify those and then push back against the schools a little bit. But Michael also asked about.
They certainly are different, and it's kind of conference dependent too. What we're seeing is the revenue share agreement really starts at the conference level. And so if you look at a Big Ten agreement, it's going to look real similar from school to school, very similar. And same if you're looking at an SEC or an ACC or Pac-12 agreement, they're going to look very similar. And a lot of them are going to have the same objectionable provisions in there that you're going to want to take a look at. And a lot of that has to relate with termination ability on the school's behalf and what that looks like. Like even if one of the provisions, Tony, what was the provision that we were talking about? Something to the effect if the student athlete considered entering the portal, it wasn't even actually.
Yeah, we've seen, and you could probably find these on Google, frankly. But the big one is the language around the transfer portal. So there's a difference between entering the transfer portal, transferring, and intending to transfer.
What it was.
Obviously,
Mhm.
yeah, like, I don't know what intending to do something means. That's pretty ambiguous language. So that would be something that you would want to look at, see if that's in there, because frankly, a school could sort of say, well, I think Charlie's intending to transfer to another law firm, so we're gonna terminate his contract or find him in breach of contract. So those are some of the things that you would want to look out for.
Michael, I looked at your question a little closer. And I think I missed the first part. You asked about what the difference between the benefits agreement and the rev share agreement is. So the benefit agreement deals with the scholarship component of that and your room and board as opposed to your actual payment for your revenue share. So that's the difference. So what you'd sign on that National Signing Day.
We've kind of already been talking about this stuff just as we've been going, but just negotiating the deal, like when these negotiations are starting, right? Um, and negotiating the deals the right way. So schools are doing this earlier and earlier. Like Davis said, we've seen it a lot of times with juniors in high schools when they're starting to get these six-figure offers from schools. And families just kind of need to understand that these conversations are not part of the recruiting pitch. When an athlete goes to do an official visit at a school, they now have, a mandatory meeting with the general manager to talk the dollar figures, right? Um, so recruiting is kind of turned into no longer about what's the right fit for the athlete or what school they like the most. It's also about the financial package that's going to be sent their way. And I think student athletes need to kind of balance that too. Like if they have a dream school that they really want to go to, but maybe that school is offering them less money, do they, take that chance, go to the school that they really want to be at, or are they only financially minded, and do they go to the school that's offering them more money? It really comes down to the student athlete's preferences and what's best for the family too.
Yeah, and it's a balance because I think, with the new world we're living in, schools are looking elsewhere too. So, you could be a current guy on a team and schools, as Cole Moore from Michigan State mentioned, they're looking at guys who aren't even in the portal yet. They're just, they're at other schools. So, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice whether, you're a high school recruiting going into college or you're a current athlete if you're not, at least taking, a look at what's out there because I think the other side is doing it.
What we do too to help with this is we kind of know the market at this point. We know what other schools are paying players that are in similar positions to, our clients. So we can go to the schools and say, hey, we know that
They
somebody
were getting to know the market better. It's still a developing thing for sure.
developing, yeah. But the communications that we were able to have with, general managers at different schools helps us to kind of get an idea of where different players should be at.
Right, and I think that I mentioned it earlier, but it's true. The one thing we're definitely seeing is the kids in the portal with a year under the belt at a school are getting higher numbers than what uh, high school athletes for the most part. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's what we're seeing.
This is real money, like six-figure money that's getting thrown out there. And it can have a real long-term impact. Student athletes can be making a lot of money in college, even more than they'd see in their, regular careers post playing time. And I think it's really interesting to hear about how some athletes are using this money. Like we've heard of people buying, rental properties at 18, 19 years old. And I just think being able to take advantage of opportunities like that is really valuable. And sometimes this NIL rev share stuff can get looked on negatively, but when you're using it like that and viewing it from that lens, I think it can be really useful for a college athlete going through this.
Dave, what happens so I mean, you've got someone who's a sophomore, junior in college or in high school, they're 15, 16, 17 years old, and it kind of relates to the question that we just got. So when are these agreements effective? When are they actually signed? Um, because at least in Michigan, you're not allowed to sign NIL agreements. So like, when do you actually sign these things?
You can sign in Michigan, and Mark Yule talked about this. You can sign a revenue share agreement if the school would allow it. You can't take the benefit while you're still playing here in Michigan, but you can sign it. I mean, I think the question related to whether the student athlete was 18 or not, and you guys probably know this better than I do, but in Michigan, I don't think you can be bound without a parent. But the student athlete, frankly, is not really bound at that point with the benefits agreement. Now, the revenue share agreement, that's a different story. But that wouldn't take effect until it might be signed now, but it won't take effect until the student athlete actually steps on campus. They don't want to start paying. I mean, I have heard some SEC schools starting to pay early. I have not seen those agreements. I don't know that that's the case. Everything I've seen has been, for it, like take a 2026, then they're going to start likely January 1 if they're going to go play spring ball on January 1st. So, they'll sign that pretty soon, like in the next couple of months, November.
Okay. So it's when they get on campus.
Well, I mean that's when the it's executed previously, but yes, it takes effect then, right?
We're kind of getting kind of short on our time, so I'll hit real quick just some business stuff as a corporate lawyer here. So we're seeing more and more that student athletes that are entering into NIL and rev share agreements, that they're wanting to get an LLC started to enter into these agreements. I've done a couple. Is it necessary or not is the question I always get. And the answer is, like many legal questions, is it depends. It really depends on what the family wants to do. The short answer from me is basically that it's not going to hurt. It can only help you. So an LLC, what that means is it's a limited liability company. The main purpose of it is to create a legal separation between you and your personal assets and the business's assets, right? So if the LLC were to get sued or goes into debt, your personal assets like your house, your car, your personal savings, those are going to get protected. And only the LLC's assets are going to be at risk at that point. Unless there's caveats to that. Unless if you're personally guaranteeing a loan, or you're committing fraud and just kind of using the LLC as kind of a blanket, then you can be faced with some personal liability there. But for the most part, an LLC is going to protect, your personal assets, and just kind of creates that legal barrier. And in fact, some schools we've seen actually are willing to make the rev share agreement be between the school and the LLC itself, which is also helpful for the athlete's personal assets. We would recommend getting in touch with a CPA to help with any NIL and rev share tax filings. We, as a law firm, don't do tax filings ourselves. We do some tax advising. But usually if there's only one member of the LLC, which is usually the athlete himself or herself, it'll be taxed like a sole proprietorship, meaning it's just a pass-through entity. The profits, the losses of the LLC are going to pass through to your taxable income, and you're going to report those on your Schedule C each year. But one thing that you can do with your LLC is what that we're starting to see is deduct some of these business expenses that you can classify some certain expenses as, like say gas to drive to practice or to drive to games, food, and even attorney or sports agent expenses, stuff like that can be deducted as a business expense on your taxes. But like we said, I mean, it's real life-changing money. You can use that for all kinds of things. We've been making LLCs for student athletes to buy rental properties, stuff like that, investments. But using a professional like us, I think, really allows the athlete and their families to focus on the sport that the athlete's playing, and then leave the contract negotiation, the drafting to us, because that can be really stressful on a family, a student, because you really do have to treat this like a business, because it really is like a small business at this point.
One last thing
Yeah,
too
and I
I
think
would add is to, look at the potential of an insurance policy. Tony, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's a guy that I played with actually who's an insurance broker. His name's Jack Miller out of Birmingham in Michigan. And he sells or helps, facilitate these sort of athlete insurance policies. Generally they are, well, for forever it was related to an individual or an athlete who was going to be drafted in the NFL draft, for example. And the insurance policy was to cover any injuries, and then, assuming there was a claim if someone got hurt, unfortunately, that the insurance proceeds would cover the sort of gap of where they pegged you to get drafted or whatever value they put on you, and then, where you actually landed. What we're seeing now, and again, this is, changing by the day, and it's definitely not settled, is that some athletes are taking out insurance policies when they come in as freshmen. Some schools are paying for insurance policies, and those will cover a sort of list of injuries, and then it will sort of specify what the the payout will be. And then, that would depend on, what the insurance company sort of values the student athlete at. But that's something that we're seeing as well. And so could be something that you try to negotiate in a revenue share agreement with the school. I think the other thing on the tax side, like Charlie said, is like a lot of these agreements, the schools want to distance themselves from any sort of professional or tax liability. So, they say all of the schools usually have an NIL policy, and these rev share agreements, they're going to say the student athlete is the one who's responsible for taxes, and they disclaim any and all liability arising out of those, the taxes. So again, I think it's sort of an example of, engage professionals, so that you can focus on the sport that you're involved in, and so you don't get yourself in trouble.
Anything else you guys wanted to hit, or you want to start to wrap up? If anybody has any other questions, you can feel free to throw them in. We can address them here at the end too.
The only thing I would advise is one thing we've seen is change has been it's continued to change, and I think the landscape is going to continue to change. There's a lot of pressure on especially the mid majors right now, and so it's going to have to get figured out. And I think we might see some programs that will get cut. So as you're going through this recruiting journey, make sure you're asking the questions. I always say, ask the coach how many years they have left on their contract. Ask the coach, how the athletic director values the program. Have there been any talks of cutting assistants? Have you lost any scholarships in the last couple of years? Things of that nature. And obviously coaches have a job to recruit players, so they'll be very diplomatic in their responses, but you can usually get a pretty good idea if you continue to ask the right questions of, okay, maybe I should be a little concerned here that this, they're not on financially stable footing. And the other thing is because of that, I think we may see collective bargaining, or we may see some other legislation that may happen. So I continue to read up on what's going on, because I think, if we have this webinar a year from now, there'll be some changes. I'm almost certain of it.
For sure. Yeah, I didn't have anything. I think the one thing that I'm not sure I talked about was, on the traditional NIL side, they now do an analysis basically on, those have to get approved through a third party company, and they look at basically the business purpose behind those deals. If you've got any questions on those, we're happy to walk through that.
Yeah. The last thing that I would say is just I think working with a professional, like I said, like us, takes a lot of stress off the families and the student athlete themselves, so they can focus on playing their sport. And I think engaging people like us, the earlier the better, is the way I see it. The general manager of these sports, what we have seen, they really want to start talking numbers at the end of seasons, before transfer portal windows open, just so they can start to narrow down how they're going to be spending their revenue share caps. But I'm not seeing any other questions. If that's it, then I think we're all set. I think we're recording this too, and I'm sure it'll get posted somewhere if anybody wants to go back and check some things out or share it at any
Thanks so
time.
much for joining us. We enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.